Hello, this is Dr. Young, and I'm going to go over your Chapter 11 lecture. We're going to talk about leadership. Actually, I should have went back here. We're going to cover leadership approaches, different theories, models, and Vroom's decision tree approach to leadership. So we're going to talk about these objectives. So, the nature of leadership. It's both a process and a property. So, it's influencing others, directing activities, motivating people to reach a common goal. And it's also a set of characteristics that is attributed to a person that is responsible for wielding that influence on others in an organization. So that's what we're going to talk about. So when we're talking about influence, we're talking about part of that is motivation, part of that is persuasion, basically affecting the behavior of others, in this case to achieve certain goals. And there's been many approaches to leadership. We're going to talk about some of the early ones. There's the trait approaches to leadership, and that attempts to identify characteristics that differentiate effective leaders from others. And that's usually focusing on leadership traits, developing methods to measure those traits, and then using those methods to select certain leaders. So you might have some type of testing to identify leadership potential. Current limited set of leadership traits, and here's a bunch of them. And you will see that this one will becomes more and more important. And successful leadership: emotional intelligence, drive, ambition, motivation, integrity and honesty, which is obviously important these days, charisma, self-confidence, knowledge of business, and cognitive ability. These are all traits of good leaders. Okay. Now, in the earlier there have been early studies in behavioral approaches to leadership. And so what we were talking about before was trait approaches, but now we're talking about behavioral approaches to leadership. So we have these studies, the Michigan studies, the Ohio State studies, and the leadership grid. And basically these are studies that helped identify behaviors that differentiate effective leaders from non-leaders. In the Michigan studies, the results from that study indicated two fundamental behaviors that leaders demonstrate: job-centered leader behavior and employee-centered leader behavior. Whoops, didn't mean to go that far. So in job-centered leader behavior, obviously you're paying close attention to the work, explaining work procedures, and demonstrating an interest in performance. And then employee-centered is when you're trying to build effective work groups with high performance goals. So those are two fundamental basic leader behaviors. Oops, I didn't really mean to do that. Sorry about that. The Ohio State studies define two independent dimensions of leadership. And that's leader consideration behaviors and leader initiating structure behaviors. So the difference between those is in leader consideration, you're kind of showing that you care about subordinates' feelings, and then you want to hear their ideas, you're open to hearing their ideas, and you respect those ideas. And then initiating structured behaviors is when there's a clear definition between roles and that every subordinate knows what is expected of them. And then there's the leadership grid. And like I said, you're going to read more detail in your text about these. But the leadership grid provides a mean for evaluating leadership styles, and then the training managers can, and then training those managers to move toward an ideal style of behavior, which there's many leadership styles. But this grid evaluates. So the emergence of situational leadership models, and this is also in your text. I'm assuming when you're when you're listening to this lecture, you should have read your textbook too, because you probably have a little bit more information as far as examples and support for the lecture through that text. Situational models assume that appropriate behavior varies from one situation to another. These situations can determine how an employee or a leader might behave. So we have to look at, well, what types of situational factors interact to determine the appropriate behavior. There might be a set. Okay, so if this happens, and the leader might follow this certain pattern of behavior for this type of situation. If another situation occurs, there might be a different strategy there, but it does depend on the situation. The leadership continuum model is the model of Tannenbaum and Schmidt, and it underlies research in this field. So we're the LPC theory of leadership. So then we're going to talk about Fielder, and that contends. Let me go back here. These are situational models. I don't want you to get this confused. That's why I'm going back, because I don't want you to get this confused with the next thing we're talking about, which is a different type. The LPC, the theory of leadership, is from Fielder, and that contends the leader's effectiveness depends on the situation. It's Fiedler. I said Fielder. Sorry about that. See how easy that is to confuse. Assumes a task or relationship focus for leaders. So if you have a high LPC, least preferred coworkers, leaders are more concerned with interpersonal interpersonal relationships. If you have a low LPC, the leader is more concerned with tasks and problems. And this posits that situational favorableness factors determine proper leadership focus. So it just depends. There's certain situations where a leader might want to take on this dimension, and then there might be another one where the leader might feel more focused on tasks. Would be the most effective way to handle a situation. You might have a situation, you could have any kind of situation, but if you're a leader and you have a situation where you have a team project that's really important and needs to get done, but you have two employees that can't get along, that are not collaborating, then you might need to take on a more, you might need to be more on the high level of this leadership theory, more concerned with interpersonal relationships at that moment. So you got to think about those dimensions. And then there's path goal theory, which is Evans and House. That focuses on the situation and leader behaviors, suggesting that leaders are adaptable to different situations. And leaders affect employees' performance by clarifying behaviors and that will lead to desired rewards. So types of leader path goal behaviors is directive, supportive, participative, and achievement oriented. And again, situational based. The situational factors that would affect this behavior choice would be the characteristics of the subordinates, their locus of control, the ability, their confidence, how much confidence do they have in their abilities to do things. The environment, which would be task structure, and the authority system, primary work group. So how's the group structured? Who has the authority? How are decisions made? What is there a lot of bureaucracy there? How quickly, all that is involved with the environment and the characteristics of that. The task structure. How is it done? What is the process? And then Vroom's decision tree approach. And that's just attempts to, and basically what this does is it attempts to see how much the employees are involved in making these decisions. And situational characteristics do determine how much employees should be encouraged to participate in decision making. And managers can choose between two decision trees, and then managers can adopt the endpoint decision styles. So here are the decision tree choices. So there's time-driven decision, has to be made on a timely basis. Development-driven decision. Say that quickly 10 times. Can be used to improve or develop employee decision-making skills. Endpoint decision styles for managers would be decide, delegate, or consult individually or for the group and facilitate. So these are the kinds of things that choices that the manager can make as far as their behavior and how they handle the situation. So, and there's more of that in your text covered, obviously, in more detail. But basically, this gives an approach for employees and managers to work through. And sometimes, you'll have a manager decide or they'll delegate tasks. They'll facilitate, encourage. There's many roles a manager can play to get things done. And sometimes it's more directive and sometimes it's more, consultative. But that's, and it depends on the situation and the fact that, you have, what if you have, I don't know, I'm just going to throw out some examples, an entry-level call center type situation where you're more of a directive, you're more micromanaging, you're telling people what needs to be done to reach so-and-so goals. This could be weekly goals, daily goals, or you could be working with a group that needs to come up with a new product, and they're very experienced, and they usually appreciate, autonomy. Another example is I'm working with, I'm teaching another class in lean. And lean manufacturing, management-employee relations are basically flipped upside down where improvements to, let's say, I'm just going to use widgets. Company A makes widgets. Their company's going, they're going to go bankrupt. So they decide to do a lean transformation. So basically what that does is everyone on the floor has to figure out how they can make their product more efficiently, more quickly, with less equipment, less space. I mean, just basically cutting all of that out. And so they have to make the changes on the floor, and the manager, instead of telling them what they need to change, the employees tell the managers, this is what needs to be done. We need to cut this and this and this. I have an idea for doing this more efficiently. And then the manager serves more as a support, consultative, instead of handing down directions from management, it's a different structure. So in that case, there's a lot of consulting and facilitating by the manager instead of just deciding or delegating. So again, this is a very flexible model approach, and it's different for different companies. It's different situations, like the one I just mentioned as an example. So that's really all there is for this week. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know, and I'll be happy to assist you. And have a great week. Thanks for listening.